everyone. Today I'm speaking with Keegan. He's a former manufacturing engineer from Iowa that is now a remote tech sales SDR living in the Colorado area. Full disclosure, Keegan is a former client of mine. I coached him directly, but what I really enjoyed about this interview, especially if you're either in an engineering career or kind of a steady job where you're expecting more or less a known path, 3 to 5% raises every year, etc., he really talks through his own experience and thought process as he reached that inflection point needing to decide, do I continue with engineering or do I transition to sales? So I hope you enjoy, and let's get to our conversation with Keegan. Thanks. Obviously, an interesting background, having been an engineer, living in Iowa, ultimately moved to tech sales and work remote, now living in the Denver, Colorado area. Pretty big life change as a whole. I'm sure we could talk about both aspects. Graduate college with an engineering degree, what happens then, and how long and why do you move to tech sales?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I started out in engineering, went the manufacturing engineering route, and I loved the work. I got to do some really cool projects, working with supply chain, manufacturing, all that good stuff, especially during COVID, made it very interesting. A few weeks of actually working the assembly lines, just 40 hours a week, so that was fun. But it was during that time that I was doing well as an engineer. Started talking with my manager about like what next steps might be, what positions might be next. And it was during that time that I was like, I felt comfortable taking any of those roles and really driving home like an engineering background. But it was also during that time that I started to realize the earnings potential, specifically in engineering, was a bit limited. And I saw people with like 15, 20 years experience not really being where I wanted to be. So it was at that time that I started doing some research, just about what else was out there. I came across tech sales, and one of the beautiful things with tech sales is clearly there's a lot of remote companies. And it was also that time in my life where I started questioning if I wanted to be in Iowa for the rest of my life, just surrounded by cornfields. So I lucked out, found a great company that offered a remote position, and was able to move from Iowa to Denver to pursue it. And with that, really setting up a lifestyle for a bit higher earnings potential and a better work-life balance.
So yeah, I guess more specifically on that promotion path, and the reason I ask, whether you're engineering or otherwise, if you're kind of in that steady job where maybe you have standard raises, no real commission aspect, you talked about those different paths in engineering that you could take. Like more specifically, what did those look like? What was maybe the earning potential over the long term?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned it, but as a steady career path, there wasn't much more than like a 5% raise each year. And generally speaking, they wouldn't up your pay moving into a different position. It was just kind of steady, maybe 5-7% raise each year if your performance was going well. And I would see engineers with 15 years of experience who are kind of just like, that's all they would really want to do with their career, tapping out around like $120,000 a year, which is great, especially in Iowa. That's a fantastic wage. But with me not wanting to be in Iowa and the fact that I was hoping to accelerate that earnings potential, I started to look at tech sales as a way to do that. And it's not totally out there for a sales professional to make more than that within their first 1 or 2 years as a sales person.
And on that note too, I am curious. So from the time you find out about tech sales, are you employed at that time? And then from then to when you actually break in, at a high level, what does that process look like for you?
Yeah, so at that time I was leading a large project and it was like an incredible amount of hours. That's where I really was like, I don't think this job's worth it. And I don't think the career path is what I want to do, especially on work-life balance. So I started looking, I reached out to several companies about a position, and it was in turn about a 1.5 month process with 4 or 5 different companies. Every interview would take like a day, and then a week later you'd figure out like next steps. So initially a lot of screening calls just with like the recruiter, 15 minutes to see if you're a fit, and then moving into conversations with hiring managers, other sales professionals within the organization, seeing if you work well with them, just getting the inside details on like what their day-to-day looks like. And then ultimately at the end, most of them asked for a few homework assignments like cold email, cold LinkedIn touch, or cold call, mock presentation essentially. And so following all of that, I had 2 offers, and it was about a month and a half into that whole process that I accepted one.
Nice. And more specifically too, like, you know, learning about tech sales for the first time, were there major gaps that you had to overcome from an educational standpoint? And how did you even prepare yourself to do things like that, presumably for the first time, like cold call exercises, et cetera?
I think it was around that time that I actually got introduced to you. And it's funny because you brought up on the channel a few times, but in terms of coaching, I worked with you on a few mock presentations, really understanding the client, the company base, and then competitors, and talking to that within those calls. And so, education wise, I think it's just important to understand as a salesperson what the role really is about. You've talked about it on the channel before, but not being incredibly charismatic or like over the top selling, and truly coming from like a consultancy standpoint of understanding problems, pains, and concerns that people are having, and why my product might address those.
Yeah, totally agree. And obviously there's levels to it, but yeah, I think a lot of people have this idea that you've got to be like this really confident, extroverted person, and it's really not the case. And definitely on the note of coaching too, that wasn't a question to set up or promote what we do, but all that to say, genuinely for everyone watching, like that's I have sessions like this, and these are the things that I try to create free content around. So by no means do you have to use a coach to be successful. I try to cover as many of these types of topics with the videos, but definitely appreciate that. And yeah, I guess, you know, I'm curious too, looking forward now, you've been an SDR for coming up on a year. I know we've had a few conversations around maybe your interest in long-term, maybe sales, maybe other routes, but I guess obviously an interesting time to be in sales right now, that the macro is not super good. Maybe take us through that feeling of like, at any point, have you looked back to the comfort you had of engineering and been like, oh man, I wish I was that? Or even with the uncertainty now, are there still things that you're excited about, or how does that, you know, how are you kind of processing everything that's going on?
I think it's difficult because as an engineer, I always felt successful because I was doing well in my projects and was continuously told like, hey, you're killing it. Hey, you're doing a good job. There's always talks around promotions and stuff like that. And so being in this environment of kind of being a go-to-market team in uncertain economic times and coming up on like the holiday seasons, it is becoming a bit more difficult to get people on the other end of the phone or outreach and having those conversations moving towards meetings. But it's never been a thought in my mind to go back to engineering or a job that isn't more sales driven. I love being to talk with smart people all day about interesting products and emerging technologies. I love the fact that there's like a carrot dangling in front of me in terms of like commission, and really putting my effort out there and having it reciprocated properly with adequate pay. So while there was some security in being an engineer and I enjoyed those projects, I think as a career move, I'm not turning back.
Very cool. No, it's good to hear. And I think, yeah, the same thing. It's, I think I had a lot of doubts about it myself, but at the end of the day, you realize once you get into it, I mean, yeah, the future is always unknown, but it's kind of a unique skill set to equip you with the ability to like figure it out, for, you know, the easiest way to say it, I guess. But yeah, I guess any other thoughts from your perspective? I think that's a great overview of kind of that transition. Obviously, being younger in your career, you're still really tapping into that long-term upside. You know, what does the future look like for you? Or conversely, is there anything, you know, I glossed over that's worth adding perspective on?
I would encourage anyone coming from an engineering background to just really understand the fact that if you want to get into tech sales, you're actually at quite a bit of an advantage. You don't have to be a very people's person, especially in some of the more technical industries. It might help you to not be over charismatic or pushy because you're dealing with incredibly intelligent people who are pretty straightforward and just would like to know the ins and out of your product and why that would fit. So being a bit more introverted, being a bit more questioning and just open to curiosity will help you long term.
Appreciate the insight. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, in the description below, I'll talk to Keegan about his preferred way if he wants to offer any way to get in touch. But yeah, appreciate everyone's time, and we will see you next video. Appreciate it.